Hello fellow plant people. In this video I thought I would show you how I construct wall mounts for my epiphytic plants. So I start with a cedar plank, and I try to get untreated cedar for this project. I also have some clear monofilament fishing line that is pretty sturdy, pretty unbreakable. I also use 4 screws. As you'll see later on, I opt for the Phillips head compatible screws, and I like the screws that have that little lip on the edge of them that helps hold the line in place. I also have sphagnum moss that I have dampened pretty considerably. And then I also have the bracket and nails to place on the back of the board in order to hang it on the wall. And then, of course, the plants. We will be mounting Ripsalis sulcata today. And because each of these plants are pretty small, I'm going to be mounting 2 of them together. So first step here, it's time to place the screws on the board and space them out. You can go as narrow or as wide as you like. I tend to give myself a little bit extra room. I tend to use a little bit more room than I think I'm going to use. And I like to leave the screw about 1/4 inch out of the wood. That just ensures I'm going to be able to get that fishing line around them. And as you can see here, I accidentally picked up 2 flathead screws, which I am not going to use. I prefer the Phillips. That matches my screwdriver, so that's what we're going to do. So I have 2 placed, and it's time to place the other 2. Voila! So that's all set to go, and as you can see, I do leave a little bit of space between that screw head and the board. That just ensures I'm going to be able to get that fishing line around them easier. That's kind of a difficult part of the process. So the second step here is to take your fishing line and take a sizable bit of extra, and I'll show you why that is in a second, but you'll pick a screw and you will wrap the fishing line around it several times, and then you will start to tie as many knots as you want. The more the better. This is a particularly important step because it's going to be what anchors the line to your board. If this slips off, you're going to have to start that all over, and if you can kind of get into the project a little bit and then it slips off, it's going to be kind of a bummer. So I usually knot this first screw or this first line several times, and then I'll wrap it a few more times, and then I will knot it several times again, because I just really want this first screw to really be anchored on that line. So that extra, you're going to want to kind of move out of the center because you're going to be using that at the end of this stage. Take your plants. I tend to clean the roots off a little bit, but that's mainly just because I like to add a little bit of my own epiphytic potting mix onto the board. You're not going to see this. It's going to be covered with sphagnum moss, but it helps give the roots something to kind of latch onto, and some extra nutrients in there for them to absorb. So I'm pretty bark forward with my epiphytic potting mix. And again, in other videos I've mentioned this, but I do use a spoma. So then I do place the plant, and this is kind of subjective. You can kind of, get a sense of which direction you want your plant to point, what direction looks best. And then you just kind of center it onto the board, and then you just start mounding the sphagnum around the base of the plant, covering the roots and covering the potting mix that you've put down. You don't have to use potting mix necessarily. I've just found that my plants seem a little bit healthier, and the transition's a little bit easier for them because they have those nutrients to kind of pull from. But yeah, as far as the moss building stage, you're really just mounding up the moss to cover up any soil or any roots that you might see. And it's pretty pliable. I've found working with sphagnum moss is pretty easy. It holds its shape, which is nice, and it kind of stays damp through the process, which is also nice. I will show you at the end of the video where I'm placing this plant. I do have a little section of wall in my plant room where I have decided to hang some epiphytes. I had a staghorn fern for a while, actually almost a year, but I've kind of adjusted the mount for that particular plant, and I was able to repurpose these pieces of cedar. So I have a few more epiphytes that can join it on that wall, which I'm really excited about. So this is the part that can either be really, really fun or pretty frustrating, depending on, really I found, depending on the size of the heads of your screws. It's really sometimes difficult to get that fishing line across that giant ball of moss and then maneuver it in a way that's going to allow you to wrap it around the screw head. I try and wrap a couple of times for each pass, but sometimes it slips. You just kind of have to take your time with it. And I tend to do kind of a U shape, so I'll start at one of the top corners and I'll go around the bottom and then crisscross. And there's a lot of footage, so I did speed up this part of the video, but you get the idea. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. You just want to ensure that you're packing in the moss, that you're making several passes over it with the fishing line, and that you are securing it to each screw with each pass. And it's kind of zen, really. It's quite relaxing, for me anyway. But really there's no right or wrong. You just want to ensure that your fishing line is tight and that you are securing it to the screw and that you're making several passes that are kind of different. So you'll do some diagonal passes, you'll do some vertical passes. And once everything starts to feel kind of nice and secure and packed in there, that's when you can tie off. And I always try and get to the screw that I started with, because that's where that extra piece, that little dangly-do is. So that's where that comes in. I just wrap that working edge of the fishing line around that same screw, and then I start knotting off using that kind of tail that I had at the start. And if you have enough, you can go to the next screw and kind of do the same thing. Just bring both ends down, to the next screw, wrap, knot again. And then I even go so far as to tuck in the ends into, underneath the line that I've put across the moss. You might even consider hot gluing the end of it just to really make sure it's secure. All right, guys, looking good. The final step, which actually you could have done before you put the moss and started mounting the plant. I just like a challenge, so here you go. But that's securing the bracket to the back of the board. That's going to be your hanger. That's going to allow this to hang on your wall. So I have the little finishing nails that won't pass through the thickness of the board. And I really like using untreated cedar because it is a soft wood. So really using those small nails, even with this mounted, isn't going to be a problem. So here's the finished product. Well, almost finished. I am going to get the bracket on the back of the board, then I'm going to hang it in place, and I will show you footage of the finished product when that's on my wall and ready to go.